Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
To another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Thursday, January 7th. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We got a great show lined up for you here today. A lot of quality topics to get into and discuss, starting off with Bianca Smith being hired by the Red Sox earlier this week. Then we'll bounce around to some news, notes, predictions, kind of what's going on across free agency, the latest reports we're hearing, possible trades. Then we'll transition into the greatest pitch of all time. The Ringer, the website out there, is running a bracket breakdown of essentially who we believe the greatest pitch of all time is. So I'll discuss the top 4 or 8, give you guys my take on exactly who I think has the greatest pitch of all time. And then we'll close out today's episode discussing the top baseball movies of all time out there. So we got a fun episode lined up for you. But before we jump in, please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever program you're using out there. Please hit that like button, subscribe, rate and review. We certainly appreciate it here. But jumping into today's episode, like I mentioned here right off the top, I did want to discuss the hiring of Bianca Smith by the Boston Red Sox. Bianca will be joining the Red Sox organization this season, making her the first black woman to coach in professional baseball history. So congratulations to Bianca. Shout out to Bianca, breaking barriers, becoming the first African-American woman to be a professional coach in Major League Baseball. So diving in a little bit to Bianca's background, I want to make everybody aware of, ultimately who is breaking the barrier here. But she was born in Western Pennsylvania, ultimately relocated to just outside of Dallas, Texas. During her youth, she went to Colleyville Heritage High School in Dallas, which actually was a neighboring high school of the school district I lived in. When I was outside of Dallas from the late 90s to the early 2000s, I attended the South Lake Carroll School District. And if you guys listening out there are football fans as well, you have probably heard of that program due to the fact that they've won a couple national championships. They continue to put out quality prospects to the college game. But Colleyville was right next door, a great high school as well, one of our rivals, and certainly a great athletics program where Bianca ultimately played softball and was a co-captain in her senior year. Upon graduation, she then enrolled in Dartmouth College, which is actually where both of her parents attended. Her dad played football at Dartmouth. Her mom was I believe, a cheerleader, also an alumni, and is now an attorney based on her degree at Dartmouth. So Bianca followed the path of her parents there to the Ivy League institution, where she graduated with a degree in sociology in 2012. But Bianca's always had an eye on getting into baseball, getting into management and coaching in baseball. She's always wanted to pursue a general manager opportunity, which, of course, we recently saw this past offseason and discussed. The Miami Marlins hired the first female GM and executive, Kim Ng, as their GM. So Bianca, of course, has very similar goals and aspirations, but because of this, she attained her degree in sports law and a master's in sports management from Case Western Reserve University in 2017. So during her time there, while she was enrolled for her 4 years, she was also working as the director of baseball operations for the Case Western Reserve Spartans. So Bianca has always had her eye on getting into management, getting into coaching, and certainly laid out her career to have the best opportunity to do so. And upon graduating with her master's in that degree in 2018, she began as a volunteer assistant for the University of Dallas baseball team. As well as in 2018, she was an intern in the baseball operations department for the Texas Rangers. She was involved in the youth outreach program and the community side of the business for the Rangers. Then in 2019, she transitioned as a baseball operations trainee for the Cincinnati Reds. It was a similar role for her there as well in the community outreach, things like that. And then in August of 2019, so just, about 18 months ago or so, she was hired as the hitting coach at Carroll University, which is located in Wisconsin. Her coaching style here, based on reports and discussions, was relying heavily on statistical metrics and data analysis. And Bianca has been with Carroll University for the past couple of years, and honestly, I think this is a big reason why females are starting to get more opportunities in Major League Baseball. And I don't want that to sound as a negative connotation or, a disrespectful statement towards Bianca Smith because, she was quoted talking with MLB Network as saying, quote, "As the hitting coordinator, I run all of our technology side for hitting. The number of different resources that the Red Sox have as far as technology goes, I'm really excited to get my hands on that and learn the different metrics. And being able to dive deeper into what I currently have is pretty exciting," end quote. So Bianca was quoted in an interview kind of discussing that side of things. And ultimately, when I was taking a step back, a little bit more of a big picture approach to, the females being hired. There's been 3 females now who have recently broken the barrier. Like I said, Kim Na was recently hired as or Kim Ang, I believe it's pronounced, NG is the spelling of the last name there, so I apologize. But she is the first general manager. There was also a woman who was hired by the San Francisco Giants, who for the first time was an on-the-field coach this past year. She coached first base during an exhibition game back in July, and this was obviously groundbreaking as well on that side of things. So Bianca Smith and my overall thoughts on, women getting into coaching, getting into baseball as they continue to break ground, but the respect aspect of things or the coaching aspect of things has certainly evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. And, even myself, when I graduated college back in 2011, launch angle was not a thing. Spin rate really wasn't an opportunity. These analytics or sabermetrics were just starting to find their way into baseball and into the conversation and being utilized in coaching and scouting and, video and 3D graphics and motion sensors that show when your hips fire compared to your arms or your elbow. And this is starting to navigate across all of the different sports. Just briefly discussing the NFL and Josh Allen, who took a huge step forward in his development. Well, he did something similar in the offseason where he learned that his hips were actually the last things to fire, which was causing him a decline in accuracy and things along those lines. So a very similar kind of circumstance or revolution is happening across Major League Baseball, where due to the advances in technology, the advances in metrics, sabermetrics, analytics, a lot of coaching has become the ability to interpret this data and then communicate this data to that player. Because back in my day or growing up, it was more coaching along the lines of, hey, this is what made me successful, or this is what we see when we visualize and want to coach with your hands, your elbow, your placement, the bat wrapping around your head, and things like that. So it was very much a visualization of, this is what I believe your swing is currently doing. This is where we want to get it to. Ultimately, from my experiences, my interactions, my life in baseball, this is the way I think we should go. And because this was the style of coaching or kind of the communication of information, this is why a lot of women did not get the opportunity to coach in baseball. Because yes, baseball and softball are certainly similar when it comes to the overall aspect of the games, but when it comes to specific mechanics or technicalities, softball's coming in underhand, and those guys or gals, I guess I should say, are throwing rise balls, right? They're throwing a ball that is coming up in an angle through the strike zone. And of course, this never happens in the game of baseball. It's physically impossible with the raised mound and overhand motion to throw a ball that increases. And because of this, a softball swing and a baseball swing are very, very different. So for a woman to come in and, whether she has the statistics, the All-American career, the success from her playing career, males and baseball players at that particular time would not kind of respect or listen to their opinion, so to speak, or their coaching style on what's happening because the game is so different. Males are just realizing that, hey, yeah, this worked for you, but that's not the way baseball internally is working. Well, with analytics, sabermetrics, statistics, all of that good stuff, like I mentioned, it is now just the fact of interpreting data and then communicating it back to the player. So Bianca is not going to have conversations of, hey, this is what I'm seeing with my eye. I mean, I'm sure she will to a certain extent, but that was the entirety of coaching during my development. This was my experience, this is what I've seen, this is what I've read, this is what I've heard. Well, now teams and players have the ability to put, movie style, those little balls and sensors that people use for characters such as like Gollum from Lord of the Rings or any sort of kind of virtual reality type of acting. Well, they put these types of suits on the players and you're able to find linear connections that are happening through the body. You're able to find how movement and elasticity continues to grow because, again, when I was growing up, if you fired your hips first thing, that was called flying open, and you were never going to cover the outside part of the plates, and, hands go first, hands to the ball, hips and hands are connected, knob of the bat to the baseball. Well, now as things evolve and continue to progress here and the increase in the power numbers, a lot of this now comes to the, rubber band effect of elasticity, right? You fire your front hip, but keep your hands back, which creates the most amount of distance between those two entities. And what happens when you stretch out a rubber band and then let go with your back hand, that thing fires forward much faster than if you did them both at the same time. So it's a very similar style of hitting nowadays where keep the hands back as long as you can, fire those hips, create the most amount of distance between the two, and then allow your hips and the force to generate and create itself through the zone and be able to drive the baseball. And this information can be determined off a computer, off of analytics, off of statistics, and the ability to interpret that, it certainly benefits females. And, not to the point where males can't do it. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that the sex of the individual who is interpreting this data, breaking it down, and then communicating it back to the players certainly doesn't matter to the point of where it did when it comes to the respect and listening aspect of the players, because they're no longer receiving Bianca's opinion. They are receiving actual statistical data and numbers to drive what she is trying to communicate to these players. So as analytics, statistics continue to grow, continue to evolve, it's certainly one of those things where as a player, I don't care who's communicating this info to me because I see it here on the screen. I just took the swing. I now walk over and, this is what I need to work on. So certainly that benefits all females who are trying to get into coaching, trying to get into leadership aspect of things with the growth of analytics and the development there. And, Bianca spoke about it herself. So once again, I don't want this to sound as a negative comment or negative commentation on the females trying to get into the baseball world. But what is exactly Bianca going to be doing for the Red Sox? Well, she was hired as a player development coach and will report to the Fort Myers location, which, of course, if you guys have been listening, used to be the high A, single A location for the Boston Red Sox, as well as the location of their spring training facility. Well, now this is going to become low A / a player development location for the organization. And, of course, Bianca, with her hitting background, hitting coordinator, assistant coach, she will be working with position players and new, younger position players to kind of introduce them to the professional ranks and ultimately doing some on-field instruction while also analyzing data behind the scenes for the Red Sox there. So one last shout out to all the females out there who are breaking barriers. Bianca Smith, of course, the first black or African-American woman to coach in professional baseball. The woman I mentioned for the Giants was Alyssa Nakin. She was hired last January, and she was the first female on-field coach. And then the Miami Marlins hiring Kim Eng as their general manager. So 3 females all within the last, 12 months here since it was last January have been hired and have certainly been breaking ground for females in baseball. But that'll wrap things up here for the first segment. Shout out Bianca once again. Shout out to the Red Sox for making this move. Certainly excited to see ultimately how Bianca transitions and following her career as she continues to develop and transition and ultimately achieving her goal of becoming a general manager here for a Major League Baseball organization. But that'll do it for the first segment. We'll step aside now here for a word from one of our sponsors and a word from one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll transition into news, notes, rumors, reports. What's going on out there in free agency? I mean, not a lot through the holidays, through the new year, but at some point this month, we should get some decisions from some top free agents. So stick around, everybody. We'll talk about that and much more when we come back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. If you guys haven't checked us out on social media yet, please head that way. Give us a like, give us a follow. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn. Follow both the GSMC Baseball Podcast, where we'll keep you guys up to date on everything that's going on here during the offseason, rumors, news, notes, everything that we're going to talk about here over the course of the next 15 minutes or so. You guys can stay up to date with real and live time online if you're following us on social media. And if you're into other things besides just baseball, whether it's news, politics, whatever it is, follow the GSMC Podcast Network on social media, and you'll be up to date on everything else going on around the world here. But jumping back in here to today's episode, I wanted to discuss the latest signings, rumors, news, notes, everything going on out there across Major League Baseball, because here as we are now in the first week of January, we're approximately only about 6 weeks away from the start of the 2021 season, or the report to spring training, if indeed everything does start on time, which the MLBPA has come out and discussed that they would like everything to start on time. They are not willing to discuss another shortened season. And with everything that the NFL and other sports have been showing us, that you can start on time, even if you need to cancel, suspend, reschedule games. You know, the NCAA basketball season currently taking place, and everything in that schedule is extremely flexible. Same with the NBA. But certainly leagues are figuring out the protocols and what they need to do to ultimately avoid huge outbreaks and kind of maintain, if there is a positive test or a couple positive tests, they're able to not allow it to become what happened to the Marlins at the beginning of last season, which basically took out the entire team for a couple of weeks there. But jumping in here, like I said, off-season activity, what's going on? The LA Dodgers made a move. They re-signed Blake Treinen to a 2-year, $17.5 million contract. The deal also includes a team option for a third year. They would be willing to bring him back. Now, Trennen is entering his age 33 season and certainly hasn't got back to the all-star he was a handful of years ago, but 2020 was a positive step after he was injury-riddled in 2019 and certainly seems like a reliable bullpen arm for the Dodgers moving forward. So $8+ million, almost $9 million a year for Trennen. That's about market rates for above average relievers. That $10, $12, $15 million mark is when you start getting to the top end of the market. So from Blake's side of things, as well as the Dodgers, this seems like a good return to a successful 2019 that took place for them. But also speaking on the Dodgers here, it's come out that Justin Turner is seeking a 4-year contract. And, of course, players are always being discussed that, when they get to this point in their career, that the years and the commitment is much greater than potentially the average annual value because you want to stay in the show as long as possible. You want to extend your career as long as you possibly can. And, of course, Turner, who turned 36 this past offseason, certainly wants to play until he is 40. But, injuries have kind of been a problem for him over the last handful of years. He only played 410 out of a possible 546 regular season games. So a 4-year deal with some injury history and, things like that, I certainly think may be a stretch for Justin Turner, where teams will be looking at kind of a 2-year pact, which ultimately, again, leads you to believe that through negotiation, you'll get a 3rd year, potentially a player option or team option for that 3rd or 4th year. But Turner has made it known that he's looking for 4 and really, wants to stay in the show as long as he can because Turner had a solid year last year, of course, shortened season, but he hit .307, 4 home runs, 23 RBIs, and third base is an area that the Dodgers, are looking at to see if they could potentially upgrade the position from Turner, get a little bit younger, and move some guys around because it's been reported that the Dodgers have interest in DJ LeMahieu as a potential replacement at second base, then moving some infielders around to fill in that third base spot. But, offensively, LeMahieu is an upgrade over Turner. So if the price is going to be very similar, I certainly think you would want to put that money to LeMahieu, who's younger. He's won the batting title in both leagues, one of only a handful of guys to do that. And Turner's a good player, but DJ LeMahieu is next level. So we'll see how those conversations continue to progress between the Dodgers and Justin Turner. But I don't think he's going to get more than 2 and 3 years if somebody really wants to have them on their ball club. So another report here, the New York Mets. They have been thrown around with a ton of different potential guys out there. The latest one being discussed is left-hander Brad Hand, relief pitcher formerly of the Cleveland Indians. Back in November, Sandy Anderson said the Mets may have claimed Hand in his $10 million option in October if, things were a little bit different economically, meaning that, if things were normal and the Indians were looking to move on from this guy, they'd certainly pay him $10 million. But, now with the way things are going, with the potential signings of some bigger free agents, they're waiting to see some of those dominoes fall to ultimately see if they can put together a top bullpen on the back end side of things. Because the Mets have already signed reliever Trevor May. They still have Edwin Diaz, who bounced back in 2020, had a solid year. Dylan Betances still there. Familia still in the bullpen. Lefty reliever Daniel Zamora. So, Hand adding a second relief pitcher from the left side to Zamora certainly fits what the Mets are trying to do. But again, I think it gets back to the fact of they're trying to figure out how much they would have to pay Trevor Bauer if ultimately he decides to sign with the Mets. And if it's not Bauer, then they're in on the George Springer conversation or sweepstakes. And both of those guys are upwards of $20, $25, $30, $35 million a year based on the reports for what they're looking to pull in for 2021. So the Mets continue to linger pretty much in every single player that is available out there. And ultimately, I do think they will be players for a few of these guys by the end of the offseason here and the start of spring training in a couple of weeks. But next up here, we have Corey Kluber, who is going to throw a bullpen for at least 10 teams who are expected to attend the workouts. He was limited to only 1 inning in 2020 due to a shoulder injury, and of course the shortened season didn't allow him to just rehab and bounce back like he may have been able to for a normal 162 type of season. But Kluber, 35 years old, he's only thrown 36 innings the last 2 years, so if anybody signs him, I do believe could be a 1, potentially 2-year deal with a team option. Certainly going to be more on the team-friendly side of things, but if Kluber is able to prove that he is healthy and bounce back, I mean, a former Cy Young winner, the Nationals again showing interest. They could slot him in at number 4 behind Scherzer, Strasburg, and Corbin. And of course, as a number 4, there's a lot less pressure to be ace-like or get back to the previous standard that Kluber has set. And if you just get some innings from him and some successful outings behind Scherzer, Strasburg, and Corbin, that's going to certainly add to the depth of the Nationals for 2021. The Detroit Tigers have signed outfielder Robbie Grossman. They signed him to a 2-year contract worth reportedly $10 million, plus some performance bonuses. Grossman, 31 years old. He's coming off a nice year in 2020. He hit .240, 8 home runs, 8 stolen bases in 51 games. He's a switch hitter, a reliable on-base bat. He's going to get them professional at-bats. He's got an 8-year career average of right around .250. He's been with the Astros, the Twins, the Athletics, and, certainly, like I mentioned, a professional hitter, which will continue to improve and grow some of the kids that the Tigers are trying to bring up. Recent number 1 overall pick, now Spencer Torkelson now in that organization, and Grossman, certainly a nice veteran that will be able to, bring those guys along here and show them what it means to be a professional and how to go about their business. So I do like that signing from the Tigers as they try to bring in some veterans to offset the youth movement that they're currently going through. But next on the list here when it comes to reports is a lot to do with the Chicago Cubs. Basically, the Cubs are starting their sell-off, like we mentioned. Yu Darvish, as well as catcher Victor Caratini, sent to the Padres. We talked about that one. They recently non-tendered Kyle Schwarber. Well, they got 4 or 5 other guys who are on their last year of control, could potentially be moved this offseason or during the middle of the season next year. We're talking Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, Wilson Contreras, Craig Kimbrell, and you go down the list there in Chicago. And, looking at potential destinations for some of these guys if they were to make moves. Of course, Contreras, there's been reports that the Phillies could be interested. If they do not sign Real Muto or if he decides to go somewhere else, trade for Contreras based on his contract and what it would take to acquire him in a trade. The ROI there could be even more beneficial for the Phillies. When it comes to Chris Bryant, there's been talk about the Phillies as well. Of course, him and Bryce Harper go back to their youth, their buddies, they're playing here, but the Nationals have been involved, they've been communicated, but an outside of the box opportunity there, I think, could be the Atlanta Braves. And with the Braves sitting at home, seeing what the Padres have done the past couple of weeks, knowing what the Dodgers bring to the table, and knowing that, you're a 3-time champ here in the National League East, and blew a 3-1 series lead in the NLCS last year, the addition of Chris Bryant to the hot corner to upgrade from Donaldson, who left, and Marcell Ozuna could potentially leave this offseason. I don't know if Austin Riley's ready to, step in and play every day. They could be an outside suitor for Chris Bryant to add to their offense. Anthony Rizzo, where could he end up? People are talking about the Blue Jays. They continue to try to make improvements this offseason. Yes, they have Vlad Guerrero Jr. there at first base, but he's also played a little bit of third base. So if you bring in Rizzo at first, you could move Vlad, and Rizzo from the left side would break up their right-handed bats that they have in Toronto. Bichette, Gurriel, Hernandez, Guerrero, they're all right-handed hitters. So if you throw Rizzo into the middle of that lineup, it could create some problems for opposing teams when they try to match everything up. When it comes to Javier Baez, the Minnesota Twins are reportedly interested. Yes, they have top prospect Royce Lewis for the shortstop position, but depending on where you stand on Royce, he could be 1 year away or upwards of 3 to 4 years away from making his big league debut. Obviously, it depends on his success and the minor league system. If they can get back to playing and get back to developing, that would allow him to get to the show quicker. But with everything going on, it certainly doesn't look like that would be this year or next year for Royce Lewis. Craig Kimbrell was the last guy we mentioned, and the Chicago White Sox continue to be a possible destination. They've been linked to relievers Liam Hendricks, Brad Hand, Alex Colon, basically every other reliever available on the market. And with Kimbrell only 1 year left on his contract, there is a club option that includes a $1 million buyout. But outside of 2020, Kimbrell has been relatively solid. He figured things out, last year just a little bit. If he's dealt, it could be a move for the White Sox to ultimately try to get over the hump, because I do believe their bullpen is the one area of the team that needs an upgrade heading into 2021. Another report just recently came out. The Angels are interested in Wilson Contreras outside of the Phillies, so they could potentially make a move for Contreras moving forward. And like I mentioned, the Cubbies pretty much have a for sale sign open outside. So if you want to call them and have discussions, they're certainly willing to discuss them with you. But last report here, or last couple reports I have, is that the Red Sox have serious interest in Jake Odorizzi, right-handed pitcher. Boston CEO or Chief Baseball Executive Chaim Bloom was part of the Rays office when they acquired Odorizzi all the way back in 2012. So they certainly know each other. He's only 30 years old. He dealt with some injuries in 2020, which limited him to, not as much success as he had in 2019 when he was an all-star with the Twins. And the Red Sox are hoping that he can get back to that particular style if they were to bring him in here. But Trevor Bauer has let it known that he is going to update us on his current free agent status on his YouTube page over the coming days. So if you guys aren't on YouTube, Trevor Bauer is certainly very active on social media platforms. He discussed the conversation he had with the Blue Jays pitching coach, and now we're going to get a more recent vlog kind of giving us an update on his thoughts, his actions, and ultimately where he thinks he is going to be headed. So the month of January here, I do expect to see some movement. George Springer reportedly received an offer from the Toronto Blue Jays. Nowhere near the $150 million he is looking for, but it is said to be a respectable offer in the 4 to 5 year range. So we'll have to wait and see if ultimately he decides to sign or if he can leverage this to get some other deals here. But that'll do it for segment number 2 here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed keeping up to date with all those news, notes, and rumors. But what we're going to do now, we're going to transition to have some fun on the backside of today's episode. Over the next couple of segments, we'll talk about the greatest pitch of all time in Major League Baseball. There's a combination of about 6 to 8 currently being discussed that we'll talk about, and ultimately I'll give you my take. And then we'll wrap up today's show talking about the greatest baseball movies of all time out there. So we'll step aside now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the greatest pitch. Which one are you guys thinking about? Let me know. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys. Hey, if you haven't checked out the other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network, do yourself a favor. Just go down to that little search icon wherever you're at. If you're in Apple Podcast, it's that magnifying glass down there in the bottom. Or if you're at Spotify, I believe it's up at the top there. Type in GSMC, and you'll be brought to 20 to 30 different podcasts that you guys can listen to stay up to date on anything you're looking to follow. Whether you're into sports because you're here for the baseball podcast, the NFL is heading to playoffs, the NBA is back, the NHL just recently reported to camp. We have the College Football National Championship coming up this next Monday. So all of those podcasts are coming at you fast and furious here with great content, quality information, keeping you up to date. Or if you're more on the political side of things, of course, everything going on with the Electoral College and the transition of the presidency. There's a lot to discuss and talk about within that world as well. So you can check out news, politics, things along those lines. Or if you're just into some other hobbies like music, movies, books, whatever it is, there's a podcast for you with some great recommendations on what to read, what to watch, what to see. You can keep up to date with all of your different interests, all of your different hobbies, with some great quality shows brought to you by great hosts within the network here. My partners within GSMC all do a fantastic job giving you guys quality information and keeping you up to date out there. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, check those out, give them a search, give them a follow. I think there's at least a handful out there that you guys will enjoy if you like this podcast. And if you do like this podcast, be a friend, tell a friend, share us with somebody you know, shoot us out to your family, your friends, whether you got a group text, whatever it is out there. Be a friend and tell a friend as we continue to grow and discuss everything Major League Baseball here on today's podcast. But now for segment number 3, like I teased in last segment here, I want to talk to you guys about the greatest pitch of all time in Major League Baseball. Not the greatest pitcher or the greatest season or anything cumulative on that side of things, but the greatest pitch overall in baseball history. And our friends over at The Ringer recently put out an article, a podcast, a little bracket kind of discussing their belief on the top 8 based on discussions they had with scouts, players, coaches, executives, all different ages, all different experiences, all different positions. And it really came down to they came up with 8 different pitches ultimately to discuss. And as I was looking at it, it is a little bit tricky when you break down. You could certainly have arguments on both sides because some of these individuals who will be mentioned were starting pitchers, and some of the individuals to be mentioned were relief pitchers. And of course, it is a different style of attack. It is a different game plan, whether you're closing, throwing the 8th inning, 7th inning, or you're trying to throw a complete game. Of course, your arsenal as a starting pitcher needs to be a little bit wider than that of relief pitchers, which allows relief pitchers a bit more time to kind of hone in on and perfect that 1, maybe 2 pitches that ultimately brings them success and keeps hitters off balance here. So I'm going to start out with fastballs. There were 4 fastballs that were brought up, and then there were 3 off-speed pitches, as well as one that I guess technically is in the fastball category, but I left it out on its own. You guys can probably think of what I'm talking about here, but if not, certainly stick around. We'll get to it by the end of the segment here. But for fastballs, the 4 gentlemen who were brought up to have potentially the best fastball of all time, of course, there's 5 guys here, actually, because I'm going to add one on my own. But the Ringer threw out the names of Billy Wagner, of course, 5'10" relief pitcher. I myself, being a Phillies fan, remember Billy Wagner coming in, throwing 100 miles an hour from that short, compact stature. His success with the Mets organization and then with the Phillies. And again, as a closer, Billy, you basically knew he was coming in and you were getting his gas. I mean, he did have a slider to offset that, to try to keep you off balance, but basically a short little lefty coming in, hitting triple digits. is one of the best pitches of all time, and he had a ton of success in his big league career, borderline Hall of Famer, having that conversation. So I certainly think or understand why he would be in the discussion here, but I do think he is a little bit further down the list. You then have Randy Johnson and myself. I added Nolan Ryan to that fastball category. Both guys upper 90s. Nolan Ryan into triple digits as well. Guys super successful. Again, lefty from Randy Johnson, a little bit of run. Big right-handed overhand power from Nolan Ryan. I would put Nolan Ryan ahead of both of those individuals who I have seen in my own personal experiences when it comes to the top pitches of all time. Of course, Nolan Ryan was on his way out, but there's enough video and evidence there to kind of understand, and watching the documentary Fastball, which communicates, again, his success and ability to just baffle hitters by hitting triple digits, 102, 103, even 104, depending on who you talk to from time to time. But the next two gentlemen who are on this list as well, you have Satchel Paige and Walter Johnson, being known for their fastballs and their success with their fastball. Again, Satchel Paige being of the Negro League in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, his statistics now being counted, which bumps him up a lot on the career lists as well there for Major League Baseball. And Walter Johnson, of course, one of the OGs way back when, along the lines of Cy Young, a ton of innings, a ton of success, and just, overall fantastic pitcher. But again, personally, I've never seen both of their fastballs. I was never able to watch the All-Star game or anything like that with them pitching to ultimately determine where they should rank on this list, but certainly don't want to disrespect either of those individuals as well with the fantastic fastballs that they had in their arsenal. So, I'd go Nolan Ryan, then maybe Page or Johnson, depending on communication from you guys out there listening who, saw them play or have seen video or grew up with the stories around those individuals. I'd love to hear from you guys to see if I'm ranking them a bit too low. But Nolan Ryan's fastball is the best fastball I believe I would put at the top of the greatest fastball all time. Now, not the greatest pitch of all time, but the greatest fastball of all time. And now I want to transition into the 3 off-speed pitches that the gentleman put together here. The first one is Clayton Kershaw's curveball. Of course, it's a Cooperstown curveball. Everybody knows 12-6. Watching the GIFs or the breaks, 2-3 feet of break when it comes to his curveball, his breaking ball. You talk to players, you talk to hitters, they let you know how filthy that pitch is, and ultimately how if it's above your head, that means it's going to be a strike. And if it's anywhere looking like it is going to be a strike, that bad boy is going to dip out of the zone, and it's certainly very tough to lay off when that is the case. But you have Kershaw's curveball, then you have Pedro Martinez's changeup on the list. And everybody knows Pedro, one of the most dominant pitchers of all time. He had that run there in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it was probably the best 2 to 3 year stretch in the history of baseball in relation to the era that he was playing in, because Pedro, of course, was in the steroid era, the live ball era, everything like that, and he was still able to go out and throw up numbers to the likes of Page and Johnson and guys back in the day when they weren't facing hitters who were juiced up or, started working out 24/7 and basically ballooned to be your Mark McGuire's, your Jose Canseco's, your Barry Bonds. Certainly, don't want to put anything on them steroid-wise, but everybody out there listening knows what the deal is. But Pedro, with his fastball, curveball, changeup combination, and his changeup ultimately being the differentiator there. And honestly, I got to give a quick shout out to Pedro. A story there is when I was growing up in high school, middle school, it was a Sports Illustrated article. That was one of the first times where it took pictures of the grips from the top pitchers in the game. Hey, this is Randy Johnson's slider. This is Pedro's changeup. This is so-and-so's two-seam. And I remember my dad took pictures of that Sports Illustrated to then print out and ultimately try to learn to throw Pedro's changeup. And, of course, I was nowhere near Pedro because my man was topping, mid to high 90s coming off that changeup. I was mid to high 80s utilizing that changeup. But ultimately, it is that changeup that I believe got me recruited to the Division I level of baseball. It was the difference in high school, because if you're able to overpower with a fastball, the players have to start a bit earlier, and then you hit them with the changeup to ultimately make people look foolish. And really, just his grip, that circle change, but it was not the exact circle. It was slightly off center. If you watch video of Pedro, he talks about how between the index finger and the middle finger, it now transitions to the middle finger and ring finger to be able to command and get the ball to dance on the way to home plate. So Pedro's changeup, in my opinion, is the best changeup of all time. Kershaw's curveball up there is one of the best curveballs of all time. Who are you guys thinking of when it comes to a curveball? Because, back in the day growing up, of course, Kershaw for me, and the way things have been here over the past decade or so, he's certainly at the top of the list when it comes to the curveball. And then when it comes to the slider, the gentleman that jumps off the page is Bob Gibson. Gibson had a year, we've talked about it, unfortunately, when he passed away, that his success back in the 60s actually led to a rule change in Major League Baseball. They actually lowered the mound because of how successful Gibson was and how much he dominated the hitters, that they decided they got to give the hitters a bit more of a chance here. So we're going to lower the mound and get Gibson back to being a human and not an alien or an extraterrestrial, just making everybody look foolish with his slider there. So I have Gibson as the best slider, Pedro's the best changeup, Kershaw with the best curveball, and then Nolan Ryan with the best fastball. But the best pitch of all time is none of those four. Of course, you have splitters, knuckleballs, things along those lines, but everybody out there has probably been thinking for the last 11 minutes, hey, when are you going to bring it up? But the best pitch of all time is Mariano Rivera's cutter. And I was fortunate enough to watch Mariano Rivera's career, watch his, entire time with the Yankees, winning World Series in the 90s, having success throughout the entire 2000s. And what was so fascinating about Rivera and his success was that the guy threw one pitch. Again, starting pitchers have to have 2, 3, 4 pitches, so it's a little bit more difficult for them to kind of perfect their bread and butter. But Rivera's cutter, probably moved more or as much as some people's sliders, but his ability to work both sides of the plate to both left-handed hitters, right-handed hitters, and ultimately have the amount of success that he did, his stats in the playoffs, his stats in the regular season, a unanimous Hall of Famer, and you're not going to get an argument from anybody across those lines. Even Derek Jeter, has his haters, and people don't think he was as good as he was, and this, that, and the third, but none of that conversation happens with Mariano Rivera. And there's video out there. I implore you guys to do some research, head to YouTube, kind of Google Rivera interviews and discussions and things like that, where he basically says, for 17 years, guys knew that I was going to throw this cutter, and they still couldn't hit it. And honestly, as a position player, it always kind of baffled me, because I had the most trouble with the pitchers who could throw the most pitches, 4, 5, 6 pitches, in, out, this, that, and the third. And if I knew a guy was fastball slider, you can eliminate one of those till a certain count and then attack certain pitches otherwise. But even Rivera, hey, I'm getting a cutter. So if this thing starts in off the plate, it's going to come back in, get the inside corner because I'm a right-handed hitter. Or if this thing starts over the heart of the plate, it's going to be outside corner. Or if it starts outside corner, it's going to drop off and ultimately be a ball. But that must show you how fantastic this pitch was, that hitters couldn't read spin. And even if you can't read spin, based on the history of 15 years, what this pitch is going to do. So you don't even have to read spin. All you need to read is location and then understand how far it's going to break and where the ball is going to end up. So from a surface level, I have trouble understanding how a guy throwing one pitch over and over could be as effective as he is. But I think this just demonstrates how great of a pitch ultimately this makes it. And I don't think that this conversation is really arguable when it comes to the greatest pitch of all time. Maybe when, again, you're discussing fastball, slider, curveball, but overall, everything included, Mariano Rivera's cutter has to be the top pitch of all time. 17 years, ERAs under 2s, under 1s, postseason success, World Series success, unanimous Hall of Famer, and the guy threw one pitch to major league hitters and all-stars. Again, these are quality teams, quality opponents that he is just mowing down time after time after time, and it was just fascinating to watch the success of Rivera. So, you guys listening out there, who did I miss? Who didn't I mention in regards to some of the greatest pitches of all time? Phil Niekro and the knuckleball. Rest in peace, Knucksy, who we talked about on Monday's episode. But, Nolan Ryan, Pedro, Bob Gibson, Clayton Kershaw, and Mariano Rivera. And Rivera's cutter, I'm making the top pitch of all time when it comes to Major League Baseball. So leave a comment, guys, if you have somebody else who we missed out there or what your take is on the greatest pitch of all time. I'd love to hear from you guys and, ultimately think about some of the guys that, you're thinking of here back from your time growing up watching baseball. So do me a favor, rate and review the podcast. Let me know. But for now, we'll step aside one last time here for today's show for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll continue to have some fun here. I'm going to talk to you guys about the greatest baseball movies of all time, which ones I like the most, ultimately, who you guys enjoy the most. So let me know. We're having some fun today. But I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I certainly appreciate it. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We're having a little bit of fun here as we're wrapping up today's episode, coming to you live Thursday, January 7th. That's right, we are back on schedule 2 times a week for myself. I'll be coming to you guys every Monday and Thursday here moving forward, and of course, my companions within the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be bringing you guys content on a daily basis, keeping you up to date on everything you need to know across baseball. So hit that subscribe button. That way, when a new episode is posted every day, you guys are getting it, pushed out to you. You don't have to go searching for it, and you can just click on that podcast app and know exactly what's going on in baseball and be the smart group, the smart guy out of the group of friends, right? They'll be talking baseball. Hey, I know exactly what's going on. Did you know the Padres signed Ha-Seong Kim to 4 years, $28 million? Because I did, because I listen to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. But I wanted to continue to have some fun here, wrapping up today's episode, talking about the best baseball movies of all time. And this isn't based on Rotten Tomatoes, or this isn't based on a metric score or anything along those lines. I just put down a list of kind of my favorites or all-time baseball movies, and then there are a few of them on here that would certainly go into the worst category, depending on which, again, metric if you're looking at. So I'm going to name some of these movies. People listening out there, you're going to go, oh my God, that movie's terrible. I hate that movie. What's he talking about? But again, just perspective and kind of, my age growing up when these movies were released, it certainly affects how it, how it speaks to you and your memories and kind of, the nostalgia you can put to it. And then there's quite a few on here that were before my time that I've seen once a long time ago. Certainly got to go revisit and things like that. But I wrote down a top 10. And then I found myself putting like 3 or 4 movies in the same category. So ultimately, I think I have like 15 or 20 of them kind of written down here in front of me. But some of the worst ones that I had written down that I enjoyed still were Benchwarmers that recently came out. That was a comedy mocking some horrible baseball guys. And then the other one I wrote down was Summer Catch. You guys remember that movie out there? Freddie Prinze Jr., Jessica Biel. Again, I myself, being a teenager around the time that was released, Jessica Biel was certainly an attraction to go see that movie. And then I'm from Philadelphia, so the fact that Freddie Prinze Jr. gets signed by the Clearwater Thrashers of the Phillies at the end, I always loved, because I, rooted for them and knew people who played for them and, things along those lines. So Summer Catch, a horrible flick if you're looking at critics' reviews or standing on Rotten Tomatoes, but ultimately I enjoy that one, and every time it's on, I find myself watching it, because the sidekick, I can't remember his name, but he's Shaggy from Scooby-Doo as well with Freddie Prinze Jr., so those two are always kind of together in their movies. I thought he was hilarious as the catcher, trying to keep Freddie Prinze focused and all of that good stuff, but Summer Catch, one of my favorites for sure, even though it is a horrible, horrible movie. But now let's get to the top 10. Number 10, I put a couple of movies that I have or haven't seen, in quite some time, starting out with 8 Men Out, the movie depiction of the 1919 Chicago White Sox scandal, throwing the World Series. Now, that's a very good movie. Gets very high reviews, but it's been a long time since I've seen that one. There is also The Natural on there as well. A lot of people put that high on the list, but again, a little bit before my time, so, really didn't speak to me as a kid growing up, and I don't think I've rewatched it here now that I've transitioned into adult life to kind of appreciate that side of things. And then lastly in this category is the original Bad News Bears. Of course, they have the remake that came out in the 2000s at some point. That Billy Bob Thornton, I believe, was in the remake, and that one got horrible reviews. I did see that one, but the original, I was told, was fantastic. Looking online, a lot of people rate it very high, but that's another one kind of in that category that I've seen, or haven't seen, where it's, it's been a minute. But transitioning to number 9, this is another one where these two movies, based on who you talk to, could be graded out horribly, or it was a terrible movie. But first off, Mr. 3000, where Bernie Mac retires. Rest in peace, Bernie Mac, but he retires with exactly 3,000 hits. He then comes to find out that one of his games was calculated twice, where he actually has 2,997 hits. So as like a 50-year-old, I believe it is, he has to go back to the major leagues to try to get 3 hits to reach 3,000, and ultimately he sacrifices to win a game, doesn't get there, but then goes down as a better player, learns to be a better teammate, and of course the life-teaching aspects of sports comes out in Mr. 3000. Along with that one, I have Fever Pitch. Drew Barrymore stars in that one, the story of the Boston Red Sox with Jimmy Fallon. Those two had great chemistry in that movie, but becomes aware, Drew Barrymore understands that Jimmy Fallon loves the Red Sox more than their relationship, and she thought he was kidding, but ultimately as they continue forward, she learns and grows and accepts and expands, and a nice little caveat to that movie is it was actually filmed in 2004, which is when the Red Sox just so happened to win the World Series for the first time in 86 years, so they actually had to rewrite the ending of the movie to kind of include the postseason run in the World Series, and it certainly changed the ending and the theme of the entire film, but it's a funny little film, and if you're a diehard baseball fan out there, you can certainly relate to or understand some conversations you've had with current or former girlfriends or wives, and discussing your relationship with the game of baseball, and ultimately how that's going to relate to your relationship with your partner as well. So number 8, I have For the Love of the Game. Kevin Costner, he goes as Billy Chappell. John C. Reilly is the catcher in this film, and honestly, this is one that I quoted throughout my playing days. It's kind of a love story, baseball story. Billy Chappell's going out, he's retiring, he's throwing a perfect game down the stretch. He's on again, off again with his girlfriend. She's in his head, he can't think about it, and the one that I always quote is, "Clear the mechanism." And you hear all the crowd noise, and all of a sudden it whoosh, and you're into that zone that all athletes talk about. And, clear the mechanism is something I've said to myself often, even here at work or things like that. When things get too loud upstairs, you got to slow things down, just clear the mechanism, focus in on what you need. But I certainly love that movie, watched it in college, watched it, multiple times. And Kevin Costner pops up more than once here. So certainly he may be the best baseball actor of all time, just based on the multiplicity of times that he ends up on the list here. So, number 7, I have the Major League franchise. Now, of course, the first one, based on the critics, was graded extremely well. And then 2, 3, or whether 3 is back to the minors or there is a third and then back to the minors. But I've seen all of them. I enjoy all of them. I love the characters. Charlie Sheen, Wild Thing, Pedro Serrano. You got the manager, the owner of the team. It is just hysterical. Wesley Snipes, Willie Mays Hayes is involved in a couple of them. So I enjoyed the comedy of Major League. I enjoy the second one, the third one, back to the minors. But certainly based on reviews, they get worse and worse as you get to sequels, because that's one thing you've learned. Sequels in regards to baseball movies, according to critics and reviewers alike, don't do as well as the originals. So a lot of times it's just, hey, man, leave it go, even though you think you can recreate or emulate the success you had the first time through. But everybody knows the Major League franchise, Wild Thing. So it's a fantastic movie series there. But transitioning to number 6, I have Moneyball. Of course, Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill, representing the Oakland Athletics and what they did back in the 2000s to learn to transfer from kind of money and paying Johnny Damon and letting everybody walk to understanding and revolutionizing the analytics side of things. We need runs. We need hits. This is what we need. We don't care how we get them. We're heading there, and Jonah Hill's fantastic. Brad Pitt as Billy Bean is excellent as well. There's quite a few scenes in there where it's analytics versus scouting, scouts going against computers, and you can kind of see how this could be real and still currently taking place. But a very entertaining and fantastically well done movie there. Number 5, I have 42, which of course is the movie about Jackie Robinson. Chadman Boswick is the star as Jackie Robinson, but Harrison Ford as the owner of the Dodgers is one of my favorite characters in the movie. Of course, you understand the racism and everything that Jackie Robinson goes through, but the ability of Harrison Ford to project, the ability to rise above that racism, or the ability to communicate the amount of racism that he's receiving and communicate that to his players and be able to just make everyone around him aware of the situation, a better human, a better understanding of what's happening, sticking up for your teammates, sticking up for your friends, sticking up for your organization. Having the courage not to fight back as opposed to being told to have the courage to fight back, and being able to relate that to where you are in life and in different aspects of your personal life, and when it is right to push back and when it is right to not push back. But, having the self-respect in all ways across the board to be able to understand that stuff. I watched clips of that the other day. Fantastic movie, certainly 42. So if you haven't seen that one, check it out here. But at number 4, I put together 4 different titles and kind of lump these into my childhood baseball films, I guess you could say. Well, starting out first, of course, we have The Sandlot. Everybody knows The Sandlot. Those guys are still around Major League Baseball. You see them pop up from time to time. I think it was the 25th anniversary not so long ago is the reason they were kind of going around, but it just takes you back to your days as a kid where you got together with the kids in the neighborhood. You played around the corner. You played on some beat-up old ball field. You had 1 bat, 1 ball, a couple of gloves. You shared gloves when you flipped to the field and to hitting. And, it takes me back to a time in high school where we played on this field where trees and everything were involved. It was literally in a park, but you played the trees. The ball went into the trees. You could catch it while it was falling down, and it still counted as an out. Or there were a jungle gym set that was in play, and you had to maneuver if the ball was hit there. And, certainly takes everybody back to kind of that childhood dream and that childhood experience of just getting together with the boys, heading to the park and playing some ball. So a lot of fun there. But the other ones I have are Angels in the Outfield. Of course, everybody remembers that one. The kids and the LA Angels, the actual Angels, are helping them win games, and it's a comedy. It's a lot of fun. Then you have Little Big League. week where, oh gosh, I forget the guy's name, but his grandfather owns the Twins. He passes away. He leaves the Twins to the kid who loves baseball. He then becomes the manager, loses himself, finds himself. Ultimately, if you're looking at the ratings again, it's probably not a highly rated movie, but certainly one's for kids in their 20s and 30s. They enjoyed watching that one growing up. And then the last one I have in that category is Rookie of the Year. Henry Rowan Gardner. So Henry Rowan Gardner, pitching coach. Oh gosh, I forget that gentleman's name off the top of my head. Brigma. That's it. Brigma was fantastic. Playing for the Cubs, breaks his arm, throws 100 and some miles an hour. Then during the final scene, breaks his arm again. So now he's back to a normal kid, goes back to life. And certainly that one is fantastic for all the kids my age or all the gentlemen my age out there who have watched it. But truly coming down to the top three here. These are kind of the three movies that I think a lot of people would recognize as the top baseball movies out there. Starting out at number 3 with A League of Their Own. I mean, a fantastic movie. I didn't appreciate it as much growing up, but watching it again here now as an adult, a college-age kid, you really do appreciate the story, everything that's being told, as well as the cast in the movie. I mean, you got Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, not to mention Tom Hanks. Pretty much right before Tom Hanks became one of the biggest actors on the planet. This was one of his earlier roles that people now go back and go, oh my God, that's Tom Hanks. This is fantastic. And, everyone remembers there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball, and just all of those scenes, and certainly a ton of fun for everybody out there. But the top two, you probably always hear. Number 2, Field of Dreams. Once again, Kevin Costner shows up in both of these top 2. Spoiler alert for what's number 1, but you guys already know what number 1 is if you're a baseball fan. So number 2, Field of Dreams. Anybody out there who, has lost their father or lost a family member or somebody who helped them growing up certainly feels nostalgia, just trying to have another catch, just trying to have another day with that person, and being willing to sacrifice potentially the farm and having trust in the bigger picture. And, people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come. And, James Earl Jones, that entire scene, that entire speech about baseball being the only thing consistent in this world, bringing everybody back. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that scene. It's just fantastic. So that's my second one. And then, of course, number 1, everybody knows, best baseball movie of all time, Bull Durham. Nuke LaLoosh, up there as the mound, the big guy, hot shot on the hill, can't find the strike zone. He's going to the show. They bring in an old catcher, career minor leaguer to bring him along, but he does so in, a couple of different ways. He tries to get into a bar fight, and then all of a sudden he swings with his right hand, and he's like, the lesson tonight is never hit with your pitching hand, always hit with the offhand. He helps him with his interviews, but you basically see a behind-the-scenes world of minor league baseball. And this was one of the first times that Hollywood kind of dove into the minor league aspect of baseball this detailed. But it hits home with anybody who's played, because we've all been on those bus rides for 5 hours. We've all wanted a rain delay where you go on and you turn the sprinklers. We've all dealt with the local crowds and things like that. And, hitting it, it's just, man, it's a perfect baseball movie when it comes to the catcher telling him what's coming because the pitcher's shaking him off, and you need to understand this part of baseball and that part of baseball. And, this guy's a dead ball, fastball hitter, first pitch. Well, he ain't seen my heat. And then all of a sudden he hits it a quarter mile, and Nuke LaLoosh is like, you told him it was coming, didn't you? And he's like, yep, absolutely. So they bond together. But anybody who's been on the bus for 5-6 hours, played a game, been on the bus for 5-6 hours, they certainly relate to those guys there in Bull Durham. But that was a lot of fun. I mean, what did I name there? Probably 15, 20 different movies. Some of them good, some of them not so good. But let me know your favorite movie. Like I asked, last segment, your greatest pitch of all time. Put it in the comments. Let me know what your favorite movie is. If I should watch The Natural again, 8 Man Out. Remember the Yankees. There's a couple of Yankee movies out there I saw as well that I had never seen but are glowing reviews. So let us know. But certainly be a friend, tell a friend. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, I certainly appreciate it. Share us, like, rate, and review. Check us out on social media. You guys know all this stuff here as we're transitioning to 2021. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thanks again for listening, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I'll talk to you guys again on Monday. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.